In a small sun-baked village at the edge of the savannah, life moved slowly. Yet for one young woman, every day felt like a battlefield. Her name was Amara, a girl no older than 23, with eyes that carried both the innocence of youth and the heavy burden of survival. She had no father to guide her, no mother to lean on, no siblings to laugh with. Amara had been an orphan since the age of 12, when a sudden fever claimed both her parents within the same week. Since then, she had learned the bitter truth of life, that survival did not wait for sympathy. The village whispered about her misfortune, but very few lifted a hand to help. As she grew into womanhood, the whispers turned into judgments. She will amount to nothing, some said. Look at her, wandering like a beggar, others sneered. And so, Amara carried on, with only her determination to live as her closest companion each morning. Before the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, Amara was already awake. Her small thatched hut, built from clay and patched palm leaves, offered little comfort, but she never complained. She would rise from her thin straw mat, wash her face with cold water from the clay pot, and tie her fading scarf around her head. Then, with her slender hands, she arranged a few oranges she could afford into a woven basket. Those oranges were her lifeline, the only hope to bring home a few coins that could keep her from starving. Carrying the basket on her head, Amara would begin her long walk to the roadside, her bare feet pressed against the dusty earth, each step a reminder of her struggles. The path was not easy. It was long, uneven, and full of stones. Yet she never turned back. With each stride, she whispered silent prayers. Let me sell today. Let me find food. Let me survive. By the time the sun fully rose, Amara had already taken her place by the roadside, where travelers and traders passed. There, under the blazing heat, she laid out her oranges neatly on a wooden tray. Their bright color was her only advertisement. She called out gently, "Sweet oranges, fresh oranges. Come and buy." But the people who passed her by rarely stopped. Many simply glanced and walked on. Others looked at her with pity, but not enough to open their purses. And some mocked her openly. Oranges? Is that all you can do with your life? Amara? One woman sneered as she adjusted her fine wrapper. Look at the poor orphan, trying to act like a businesswoman. A group of young men jeered, their laughter cutting like knives. Every insult stung, but Amara swallowed her pain. She had grown used to mockery, but the wound never stopped burning. Deep down, she longed for dignity, for someone to see her not as a helpless orphan, but as a young woman striving against impossible odds. Still, she endured. She would sit by the roadside for hours, the scorching sun beating against her skin, sweat trickling down her back. Sometimes she sold 1 or 2 oranges, enough to buy a little cassava flour for the night. Other times, she sold nothing at all and went to bed hungry. Yet no matter how hopeless the day seemed, she returned the next morning, basket in hand, ready to try again. But Amara's struggles were not only with hunger. The loneliness was perhaps the heaviest weight she carried. She had no one to talk to when the day grew long, no one to share her tears with when the night was silent. She often sat outside her hut, staring at the moon, whispering to the stars as if they were her only friends. Why was I left alone? She would ask softly. Why must I suffer like this? Am I invisible in this world? But the stars never answered, and the night winds only carried her words away. The villagers often used her as an example for their children, an example of failure. Study hard, they told their sons and daughters, or you'll end up like Amara, selling oranges by the roadside. Each time she overheard such words, her heart sank deeper. She was not just poor. She was ridiculed, rejected, and branded as a symbol of hopelessness. Yet, despite it all, Amara refused to give up. There was a fire inside her, small but unquenchable. It was the same fire that made her wake before dawn, that pushed her to walk miles with her basket, that gave her the strength to sit under the burning sun. She knew that if she stopped trying, then she would truly have nothing left. One evening, after another long day with barely any sails, Amara returned to her hut. She placed the few remaining oranges carefully on the ground and sat beside them. Her stomach ached with hunger, but her spirit ached even more. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in many weeks, she let them flow freely. "What is the meaning of all this suffering?" she cried out. "Am I cursed to remain in shame forever? Will no one ever see me for who I am?" Her sobs echoed into the empty night. But even as the tears streamed down her face, Amara wiped them away. With the back of her hand, she lifted her chin, breathing deeply, and whispered to herself, "No, I will not give up. Tomorrow, I will rise again. Tomorrow, I will try again." And so, she did. The next morning, as the sun began to paint the horizon with shades of gold, Amara rose once more. She placed her oranges in the basket, tied her scarf, and set out on the long road to the highway. Her feet were tired, her body weak, but her determination remained unshaken. Little did she know that this new day, this ordinary morning that began like all others, was the day her life would take a turn she could never have imagined. For fate was preparing to cross her path with someone powerful, someone who would see beyond her ragged clothes and dusty skin, someone who would uncover the depth of her struggle and change her story forever. And as Amara settled once again by the roadside, arranging her oranges carefully, her eyes lifted to the horizon. She could not explain it, but in her heart, she felt that something different was coming. Something extraordinary thought her struggle was about to be seen. Her pain was about to be acknowledged, and her life was about to change. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the dusty roadside bustled with life. Traders balanced baskets on their heads. Children chased each other in laughter, and the rumble of passing vehicles filled the air. But for Amara, this was just another battlefield of survival. Her tray of oranges sat neatly on a worn-out wooden stand, the bright fruits glowing against the dullness of her faded clothes. She lifted her voice, soft yet steady. "Sweet oranges, sweet and fresh oranges. Command. Buy." A few people glanced at her, but most walked past without a word. To them, she was just another roadside seller, one of many faces swallowed by poverty, invisible unless mocked up by midday. The air grew heavier with heat, and so did the sting of humiliation. A group of village women, well-dressed and brightly patterned wrappers, walked past her stall. They carried baskets full of yam and palm oil, their bangles clinking as they gestured and laughed. One of them, Adaze, stopped right in front of Amara. Adaze was known for her sharp tongue, and today, she was in no mood to hide it. She bent slightly, her eyes scanning the oranges. "Amara," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "these are all you could bring today? Just this? Even my little son can carry more on his head." The women around her burst into laughter. Amara forced a weak smile, bowing her head in silence. Adaze continued, her words cutting deeper. "Instead of working hard like others, you sit here every day, waiting for pity coins. Who will marry a girl like you? No family, no dowry, no future." The laughter grew louder. Another woman chimed in. "Even if a man marries her, what will she bring? Into the home? Oranges?" The group cackled, their voices echoing down the road. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she rearranged the fruits, pretending not to hear. But inside, her chest tightened with shame. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the earth so no one would see her. A group of young men nearby, idle and carefree, joined in the mockery. One of them, tall and boastful, shouted across the road, Amara, why don't you just give up and marry an old man? At least then you won't starve." His friends roared with laughter, clapping each other on the back. Amara lowered her gaze, blinking rapidly to hold back the tears. She whispered silently in her heart, "Stay strong, Amara. Do not cry. Do not let them see you break." Still, the humiliation was unbearable. By afternoon, the crowd had thinned, but the echoes of their mockery lingered in her ears. Amara leaned against her wooden stand, exhaustion washing over her. The oranges remained unsold, their bright skins now mocking her with their silence. Suddenly, a fancy car rolled slowly to the roadside, a sleek black SUV, its polished body reflecting the sun. The hum of its engine silenced the murmurs around. Villagers turned their heads, some shading their eyes with their palms. Cars like this rarely stopped in their small community. Amara froze, her heart thumping. The car door opened, and out stepped a man dressed in an immaculate suit. His shoes shone as if they had never touched dust. His wristwatch glinted in the sunlight, and his posture radiated authority. It was Chief Abina, a billionaire businessman whose name was known far beyond the village. People whispered about him, about his wealth, his influence, and his generosity. It was said he could change someone's life with a single decision. The villagers stirred, murmuring among themselves. Some rushed forward, eager to greet him, bowing low and stretching out their hands. Amara stayed rooted to her spot, clutching the edge of her tray nervously. Chief Obina glanced around, his sharp eyes taking in the roadside stalls. Then, to everyone's shock, he walked straight toward Amara. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adaze and her friends stood frozen, their earlier laughter silenced. The young men who had mocked Amara exchanged uneasy glances. All eyes were now on the orphan girl and the billionaire. Amara's breath quickened. She bowed her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Good afternoon, sir. Oranges. Fresh oranges." Chief Abina studied her closely, his gaze not on the fruits but on the young woman before him. Her clothes were torn, her scarf faded, but her eyes, though tired, still carried a quiet strength. "How much are they?" he asked, simply. Amara swallowed hard. "They are 5 naira each, sir." Chief Obina nodded, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out crisp notes, far more than the value of the entire tray, and placed them gently on the table. "I'll take them all," he said. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Amara's mouth parted in disbelief. Never in her life had she sold all her oranges in a single purchase, let alone at such a generous price. "Sir, all of them?" she stammered. "Yes," Chief Obina replied firmly. "But not just the oranges. I want to know your story." Amara's chest tightened, tears threatening to spill. She bowed deeply, struggling to find words. Behind her, the same villagers who had mocked her only moments ago now whispered feverishly. "Why her?" Adaze muttered, her face pale with envy. "Of all the people here, the chief chose Amara?" Another woman gasped. The young men who had laughed at her earlier now looked at each other uneasily, guilt flashing in their eyes. For Amara, the humiliation of the morning was still fresh in her memory, but now something else burned in her chest. A strange mixture of hope and disbelief. The powerful man who could change lives was standing before her, seeing her not as a beggar, not as a failure, but as a human being worthy of dignity. She clasped her hands together, whispering, "Thank you, sir. Thank you." But deep within, she wondered, why me? Why today? Could this truly be the beginning of something new? And as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the roadside, the story of Amara's life was about to turn in ways the entire village could never have imagined. The orphan who was mocked for selling oranges was no longer invisible. She had been seen, and soon the world would know her name. The marketplace had fallen into a stunned silence. Even the hawkers who usually shouted their wares lowered their voices, straining their ears to catch every word exchanged between Amara and the billionaire, Chief Obina. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Amara's shoulders. Only minutes ago, she had been mocked and ridiculed, her dignity stripped bare in front of the entire village. And now, this powerful man stood before her, not only buying all her oranges, but asking for her story. Amara's voice trembled as she tried to answer. "Sir, I am just a poor girl. There is nothing to tell." But Chief Obina tilted his head, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Everyone has a story," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "And often, the ones we overlook are the ones that matter the most. Speak. I am listening." The villagers leaned closer, some even abandoning their stalls. Adais, who had mocked Amara earlier, pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her lips pressed tightly together. She would not miss this. Amara hesitated, her eyes flickering from the curious faces of the villagers to the billionaire standing patiently in front of her. She clasped her hands tightly to steady her trembling fingers. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Amara. My parents, they died when I was still a child. My father was a farmer, and my mother sold vegetables in this same marketplace. They worked hard, but sickness took them both too soon. Since then, I have lived alone, struggling to survive." Her voice wavered, but she continued, her words carrying years of buried pain. "I never went to school. I could not. Instead, I picked oranges from the trees on the edge of the village and sold them here. Every day, I wake before the sun rises, walk long distances to gather what I can, and sit here calling out to strangers, hoping someone will buy. Sometimes I sell enough to eat. Other times, I go to bed hungry." Chief Obina's eyes softened, though his face remained unreadable. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some lowered their heads in shame, recalling the many times they had walked past her without offering help, or worse, the times they had mocked her. Amara's voice broke as she spoke the words she had never dared to say aloud before. "They laugh at me. They call me useless. They say I will die poor, that I will never amount to anything. Sometimes, even children throw stones at me and run away laughing. I want to be strong, but the loneliness, it is heavy, sir. Some days, I wonder if my life has any meaning at all." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she quickly wiped them away with the edge of her scarf. She refused to cry in front of the same people who mocked her. Chief Obina let her words hang in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to pause in their songs. The room fell silent as the bride's trembling hands reached up to untie the veil. Gasps echoed through the gathering, hearts pounded, and breaths grew heavy. For a moment, everyone leaned closer, expecting to see a shy face blushing beneath the cloth. But when the veil slipped away, the silence turned into chaos. Her face was unlike anything they had ever seen, half-scarred, with strange dark markings running down her cheek like ancient inscriptions. Her eyes glowed faintly, almost unnatural, as though holding secrets not of this world. A chilling wind seemed to sweep through the hall, though no doors were open. Screams erupted. Guests scrambled to the sides of the hall, some dropping their cups, others running for the doors. The groom himself stumbled back, his face pale as though he had seen a ghost. The bride did not move. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable, her gaze sharp and steady. The whispers began to spread like wildfire. "She's cursed. She is not human. This marriage will bring doom." But then, in a voice calm yet powerful, the bride finally spoke. "You all run because of what you see, but you know nothing of what I carry. Her words cut through the chaos, forcing silence once again. She revealed that her markings were not a curse, but a sign of protection, an ancient gift passed through her bloodline. It was said to shield the land from evil spirits that once roamed freely. The veil was never about vanity. It was her burden, her shield, her sacrifice. Tears welled up in some eyes. Shame began to creep into the hearts of those who had mocked and feared her. The groom, though still shaken, slowly stepped forward. His hands trembled, but he did not turn away. "You should have told me," he whispered. "Would you have believed?" "Mahé," she replied, her voice carrying both sorrow and strength. The guests who had fled began to return, their curiosity stronger than fear. They realized they had judged too quickly, blinded by appearances. The veil, once seen as a mystery, became a symbol of courage and sacrifice from that day forward. Their story spread far and wide, not as the cursed bride, but as the guardian bride. And though fear had filled the hall that night, respect and honor grew stronger than the screams that once echoed. Months passed, and the roadside stall was no longer there. In its place stood a small but beautiful shop, its wooden shelves neatly stacked with baskets of oranges, mangoes, and other fruits. A bright hand-painted sign above the door read, "Fresh Fruits of Hope." The young woman, once mocked and humiliated, now welcomed customers with the same warm smile she had always carried. Her business grew quickly, for people admired not only the freshness of her fruits, but also the dignity with which she worked. Even those who had once ridiculed her now came with bowed heads to buy from her. Some whispered apologies. Others simply stood silently, ashamed of their past words. She did not return their cruelty. Instead, she treated them all with kindness, for she had learned that true strength does not need revenge, it shines on its own. One day, the same billionaire visited again. This time, he didn't arrive in his luxury car, but walked quietly into her shop. Seeing her behind the counter, surrounded by her hard-earned success, he smiled. "You did it," he said simply. The woman bowed her head gratefully. "It was your seed of kindness that helped me grow, sir. But it was also the pain of humiliation that gave me strength." The billionaire nodded. Never forget, wealth is not measured in gold or cars. It is measured in dignity, in hard work, and in the way we treat others. From that day onward, her story spread across villages and towns. She became an example for many poor women, proving that even in the face of mockery and shame, hard work and resilience could transform lives. The once humiliated orange seller had become a symbol of hope. And everyone who passed her shop remembered the powerful lesson.